Three Men and a Woman. Chapter 1. 1. It may be somewhat futile for one to attempt to depict with a pen the image of a person or something, especially when the writer is a man and the subject is a woman. For neither is the man ignorant of the woman, nor is the woman ignorant of the man, particularly if they live together, love each other I don't know how, and marry, populating the earth with their offspring, sowing their seeds like seeds in a field. Don't ask me how these two different beings come together, coexist, and understand each other, assuming they are both human, and each one is an enigma to the other with no solution. I neither created them nor witnessed their creation, nor did I know their grandparents, so I wouldn't know. However, using the pen to describe, even if it doesn't offer a clear image with distinctive features, it allows each reader to draw their own image and shape it with their imagination based on the descriptions provided. It's enough reward, and God is more merciful to the writer than to burden them with futile efforts and useless toil. So let us be encouraged and put our trust in the compassionate and generous God. The night was serene, a single gunshot echoed, and the moon shone brilliantly in the foreign country sky, looking velvety to the eyes. The world seemed enchanted by its clear, soft light, wrapped in a fabric woven with black and silver threads, enticing and fascinating. The trees swayed in the air as if they were painted columns, casting long shadows on the ground and perfuming the air. All the windows and shutters were wide open, and from one of them, a sorrowful, melodious sound spread, carried by a feminine voice that effortlessly moved from one tone to another without strain or effort. In the garden of the house, there was a hexagonal kiosk made of wooden sticks, adorned with climbing plants. On it, there was a table with remnants of meat, loaves of bread, pieces of pickled cucumbers, turnips, carrots, and eggplants, a cracked disc of halloumi cheese, and beer bottles, some half-empty and others still in the ice with their tops on. Three men were sitting around the table, slowing down with their cups after having their fill of food and drink. The first of these three, and the most prominent among them, was Ayed, a man of Circassian origin, who sported a well-groomed mustache, red eyes, a loud and forceful voice, especially when calling a servant or someone else if the bell was nearby, with his girdle hanging from the ceiling of the kiosk over the table. Needless to say, he was a cunning person, firm in his principles, and a man of the earth who had neither good nor evil in him unless goodness was pardoned, or evil arose from his lack of understanding or a lying impulse. He was an experienced teacher in his 50s who preferred ease and leisure. The second person in the gathering was the Professor Halim, who had retired from work and now lived on a small private income and a monthly government pension, leading a life of leisure. He had a slender body, a thin face, delicate hands and feet, ate a lot, but it didn't show on his body, and he spoke at length, so we shall leave him for another time. The third was a young man in his early 30s, athletic, swift, and handsome, with a fair complexion adorned with a touch of red, and a few freckles on his skin. He was engaged to the beautiful daughter of Ayed, and he was preferred over other suitors due to the fairness of his face. He claimed that this feature would connect him with the Circassians and Turks and raise him above the class of simple farmers with dusty faces. The truth was that he was a farmer's son who left his village after losing his land there, and his son grew up urban and educated, studying engineering and securing a government job. They referred to him as Mahmud in official documents, but it was fair to say that he despised this name. Whenever someone called him by that name, he would be annoyed at first, then realized it would take too long to explain, so he refrained from responding, as if the caller was referring to someone else. Ayed was a glutton and a heavy drinker, and that was something he didn't hide from anyone. But when he ate or drank something, he would still encourage and urge the person with him, arranging the food nicely and enticing them. He would even take care of pouring them wine and ensuring they had a full cup. Mahmud had no trouble keeping up with him, as he was a strong young man who could boast that he could eat a variety of dishes in large quantities. As for Professor Halim, he had reached an age where he preferred to eat sparingly, never to the point of satiation. He refused to indulge in the pleasure of eating, as his profession of teaching had taught him to maintain dignity and modesty. When offered food or drink, he would politely decline, unless someone insisted, but he preferred to keep his distance from such temptations. Moreover, whenever Ayed insisted, he would raise his cup, tilt it to his lips, take a sip, and return it, leaving only a drop or two of saliva. In contrast, Ayed would indulge in eating and drinking, leaving the cup untouched, yet fully extended as if he were tapping the table, saying, "Ah." He would consume his drink excessively, not satisfied unless he saw others drinking as fervently as he did. When Mahmud tried to reason with him, saying, "My stomach is like that of a chicken, where do you expect me to fit all this food and drink?" Ayed would respond, "I swear I saw a younger man than you come and finish off a large platter all by himself. He wiped it clean and even licked it, and he would easily outweigh me if we were both put on scales. I can put all my clothes in one hand and balance it against him." While touching his well-groomed mustache, or so it seemed, not a single hair out of place, Ayed would say, "Yes, he has a strong stomach like a young man, able to withstand any amount of food." Professor Helene would interject, "True, his stomach is strong and can handle the heavy intake. However, mine is aged and more like an old vessel. Bring me a youthful stomach, and I'll show you how I can consume and indulge." Yet, Ayed refused to be convinced or let anyone's words affect him, for his stomach was the final judge, the measure, and the argument. As long as this custom continued, without decline or fatigue, no other stomach had an excuse for falling short or getting upset, even if it were older than the pyramids of Khufu or the Mount of Mokattam. That night, the restlessness that prompted them to sit in the garden came from Mahassan, Ayed's daughter, a delicate young girl in her 20s. However, in her father's eyes, she had become a great calamity. Mahassan was slim and graceful in stature, but her thinness revealed the lightness of flesh on her arms, chest, and abdomen. However, her build was more like that of a boy, and her small breasts resembled ripe pears. Her lips were very thin, seemingly afflicted by constant pain, though they did not lack beauty. Her fair complexion, somewhat tarnished due to her smoking habit despite her father's disapproval, did not reach the level of pure whiteness expected of young maidens. Her dark and longing eyes seemed to express constant worry or distress, giving an impression of darkness, especially with her arching eyebrows, reminiscent of lines drawn by a pen. She had a broad and wide forehead, and her black hair was voluminous, long, and silky, falling gracefully as it pleased, with no fuss or effort. She preferred to let her hair down and never tied it up. She knew how to let her hair flow and not gather it. However, despite her freedom and the ability to rely on herself in her affairs and utilize her intelligence to guide her decisions, Mahassan was not content with this independence. She inherited her parents' lack of judgment, their inability to reach conclusions, their willingness to accept words without resistance, and their propensity for pretension, boasting about things that did not exist or exaggerating their circumstances. Her tendency to be oblivious could almost lead her into dangerous situations if it weren't for the remaining vestiges of caution inherited from her ancestors, keeping her from crossing the line into recklessness or arrogance. However, her current state of freedom also meant she lacked the guidance she desperately needed, leading her to lose control over her finances and burden her family with unexpected expenses. Furthermore, her father's attachment to a Jewish girl caused further financial strain, and he claimed to be on official business during his absences, leading to significant expenses and unexpected burdens. Consequently, Mahassan lost most of her inheritance and depended on her family for her living, a situation unfamiliar to them and burdensome, given their previous financial ease. Mahassan was left to her own devices, pursuing things that seemed out of reach, and her hopes were consistently dashed, causing her heart to palpitate with anxiety unparalleled by other disturbances. Consequently, her appetite diminished, not due to a lack of desire but rather from the frustration, confusion, and constant disappointments that left her seeking something unattainable. Her heart ached, her nerves trembled, and her soul was troubled by bouts of severe palpitations, unlike any other, arising from her restlessness. She ate less not as an act of self-control or due to a lack of appetite but because of weariness, uncertainty, lack of success, and repeated failures, hiding her own desires and desires from her family, unwilling to share her vulnerability with anyone else. The freedom she had gained from relying on herself and awakening her intelligence to guide her led her to be content with her charms, her youth, her Circassian heritage, and the nobility of her demeanor. Although she was proud of her Circassian origins, her humble circumstances tempered her arrogance. All of this, combined with the admiration she received from young men and the attention lavished upon her, possibly led her to desire herself without empowerment. Nevertheless, the notion of good luck is relative. She considered herself fortunate whenever she realized her safety. However, she regarded herself unfortunate when her hopes were disappointed, reaching the point where she was despondent about everything she aspired to and keen to achieve. Her nerves became agitated, her heart troubled, and her eating decreased, not due to abstinence or lack of appetite, but due to frustration, confusion, lack of success, repeated disappointments, and hidden opportunities that could have changed her luck. Additionally, her father's attachment to a Jewish girl brought her additional misery, as he would spend heavily on her, burdening his family financially, and subjecting them to unusual expenses, albeit reasonable ones. This weighed heavily on them, given their accustomed abundance. The situation forced Mahassan to refrain from pampering herself and forego further education, with the hope that she would continue studying until she reached a point where she could be self-reliant, offering an advantage to her beauty, youth, and noble Circassian heritage. Despite her Circassian heritage, which she took pride in, the current state of affairs made it difficult for her to afford a traditional wedding, leading her to submit to her father's actions without protest. Nonetheless, her heart ached for his actions, and she found herself tormented by a continuous cycle of hope and failure. Some of the young men who approached her had a somewhat skeptical belief that she was deceitful and capricious, showing a contradiction between her outer appearance and inner intentions. They thought she spoke with her tongue what wasn't in her heart, leading them on and making fun of them. Consequently, they turned away from her in anger and frustration, spreading rumors about her that tarnished her reputation, even though she might not be at fault for anything. Nevertheless, she received marriage proposals from more than one suitor before Mahmud. The first suitor conditioned his proposal on marrying her younger sister since he was more fond of her, and he didn't want to choose happiness for himself without her. However, her sister's prolonged spinsterhood made Ayatollah and his wife upset, causing them to break off the engagement. The second suitor, one of Ayatollah's friends, had a liking for her, and she reciprocated that liking, but he didn't propose formally. Yet, he found favor in her eyes, for he was a friendly, humorous, and generous man. Then came Mahmud, who loved her, fully aware of the rumors and gossip about her. He excused her behavior by saying that some young men were bitter because they couldn't win her over, so they resorted to maligning her. Yet, deep inside, he couldn't shake off the doubts and suspicions he had about her. He noticed her lack of concern when she agreed to go to the cinema with a man she barely knew, or how she seemed to get along with Professor Halim, sharing secrets and laughter as if there was a hidden connection between them. Mahmud's love for her wasn't based on mutual love, rather, it seemed she was indifferent to his feelings and not concerned about his attentions or rejections. Despite all this, Mahmud still believed that she loved him but struggled to express it, as he feared being hurt by her as others were in the neighborhood. As for Professor Halim, he was an extraordinary man, highly knowledgeable and understanding. He had a profound wisdom and vast knowledge, yet he refused to become a professor at the university, choosing a life of ease and comfort instead. He had enough money for a comfortable life, but he lived as if he were poor, fearing a time of hardship. Due to his constant focus on studying and reading while neglecting his health and nutrition, he developed physical weaknesses, digestive issues, and nervous disorders. Despite this, he never sought a doctor's advice, relying on simple local remedies provided by his siblings, which never really cured him. In his youth, Professor Halim fell in love with his neighbor, a teacher like him. She was beautiful, kind-hearted, and had a good sense of humor. She reciprocated his affection, but when he proposed marriage, she hesitated and then declined. She confided in her sister, expressing her feelings of love for him but doubting her ability to reciprocate the depth of his love. She felt as if she was groping in the dark, unsure of what she truly wanted. Eventually, they got married, and her sister advised her to do her best to make him happy, as he seemed to have all that a woman would desire in a husband. However, her sister also warned her that she should remember to go beyond her expectations to bring him happiness, as a woman should give more to her husband than she hopes to receive. Please note that translation may not fully capture the subtleties of the original text, but I hope this helps you understand the content better. If you have any specific questions or need further assistance, feel free to ask. All of this seemed more like a warning or cautionary tale to her. Samiha wanted to make Halim happy, and she succeeded in doing so. However, she appeared lost, as if something troubled her. Her friends didn't notice this, thinking it was just her happiness manifesting in a playful manner, but she would force a smile as if it was a burden. She couldn't confide in them about her inner fear and the unknown that frightened her. One night, when the crowd dispersed and they were alone, Halim told her, "You're still a child, and you need to understand life's meaning and reality. I am happy to be your teacher." Samiha felt that this was a reproach, as if he found her lacking in some way, and that's why he tried to justify her behavior. Perhaps, neither of them realized that she was not yet mature from a sexual perspective, and her feelings of inadequacy showed on her face. After a day of their marriage, Halim asked her if she couldn't smile for her husband, and she remembered him saying, "Do you remember who I am? I am the man you honored by becoming his wife." She resented smiling for him to hide her true feelings. As time went on, she felt dizziness, stomach disturbances, and nausea, and consulted a doctor. She was carrying a child. When Halim saw her, he asked, "What's this?" She replied, "It's for your child." He embraced her with tenderness and said in a soft voice, "You and the child, that's all a man desires from his world." She tried to convince herself that she should be happy and made efforts to believe so, but despite her attempts, she couldn't rid herself of the persistent thoughts that marriage wasn't what she hoped and imagined. As the waiting and burden grew, she sought medical advice every few weeks, followed the prescribed diet reluctantly, and struggled with household chores and pretense of cheerfulness while feeling her nerves like iron spikes. When labor pains came one night, she panicked and woke Halim, insisting he take her to the hospital. She decided that this would be her last child. Halim told her one night, "You were beautiful before you got pregnant, but now, I don't know, it's as if something new betrays me in you, something I can't express." She replied, "It's just an illusion. I have been ill for so long that I forgot how I looked before." He said, "No, you have a certain paleness, and your skin seems like wax. Now, you're a fresh flower, just like before." From that day on, Professor Halim acted as if he resided in a hotel connected to others only by the neighborhood. The meaning of family and marriage vanished, and he secluded himself with his books in his study. He tried to convince Samiha not to avoid pregnancy entirely, explaining that avoiding it didn't necessarily mean separation in reality. They could still live as a married couple while being cautious as advised by the doctor. However, she refused to accept more children, asserting it was her decision, and this would be the last. He doubted that she was serious after experiencing the happiness they had together. She insisted on moving her bed and her son's cradle to another room as if it was necessary and indispensable or to demonstrate a decisive resolve. From that day on, Professor Halim acted as if he resided in a hotel connected to others only by the neighborhood. The meaning of family and marriage vanished, and he secluded himself with his books in his study. He tried to convince Samiha not to avoid pregnancy entirely, explaining that avoiding it didn't necessarily mean separation in reality. They could still live as a married couple while being cautious as advised by the doctor. However, she refused to accept more children, asserting it was her decision, and this would be the last. He doubted that she was serious after experiencing the happiness they had together. She insisted on moving her bed and her son's cradle to another room as if it was necessary and indispensable or to demonstrate a decisive resolve. As time went on, Professor Halim became like someone in a waking dream. He would sit in his study, open a book between his hands, and imagine scenes from his married life. However, he wouldn't depict them as they were, but he would linger on some aspects of this imaginary tapestry, modifying and enhancing the pictures to his liking. He created a world of imagination that fed his desire for the pleasures he missed and longed for. He used this fantasy to substitute for the reality he couldn't attain, turning it into a regular habit. Though derived from his life with Samiha, these images were not devoid of elements of bitterness because Samiha didn't consistently display the tenderness, affection, warmth, or compliance that he wished for. Perhaps, she couldn't achieve that due to her femininity. More often than not, she behaved as if resigned. The translation may not fully capture the subtleties of the original text, but I hope this helps you understand the content better. If you have any specific questions or need further assistance, feel free to ask. Against his will and reluctantly, the contemptuous one endures what he is forced to endure, not like the contented one who willingly embraces the questions posed to himself. He swallows his bitterness, and the weariness of his surroundings strikes him like a blow, yet he bears it while still sweating drops of determination. For this reason, Professor Halim did not waste time pondering over these images that are tainted and distorted from every angle, repelling him. But where else could he find other images? He resigned himself to being unable to create something from nothing or produce creativity without conception. His experiments turned into empty trials, remaining aimless. He toiled lengthily with no conclusion but frustration, wandering in its dunes, turning on its paths. So, he bought a powerful microscope with lenses and transformed his room into an office by the roadside. There, he would lean on the window, gazing through the microscope's eyepiece. In front of his house, there was a tram station, closely followed by a bus station. The sidewalks were seldom devoid of young girls or women, waiting to board and glancing left and right, walking with a tinge of anxiety or boredom. To him, their chests, backs, waists, and legs appeared clearer and closer, akin to what can be seen through a microscope. At night, when he was alone, he tried to recreate the images he saw during the day. Due to this habit, whenever he was on the road or in the tram, he would watch every lady or girl as they approached and then turned away. However, he had a particular fondness for the modest girls because he found them more capable of awakening his suppressed emotions. Despite his inclination to observe and stare at the curves, he struggled to bring their images into focus during his solitary moments. The imagined curves would intertwine and blend, eluding his vision. He couldn't hold on or preserve a single clear image that wouldn't undulate, disturb, or merge with others. It was as if he were looking at one of those distorting mirrors that deform a person, making them all head or belly, engaging in such transformations for amusement. Professor Halim was not seeking amusement, his concern was to fill a genuine void and quench the thirst of his yearning heart. His modesty, chastity, and frugality prevented him from contemplating the idea of taking a companion or knowing one of those devotees who catered to their beloveds and determined their fate. As for marrying someone other than Samia, it was an unthinkable matter. The days passed with a blend of wakeful and dream-filled nights. Initially, his dreams during sleep were profound, but upon awakening, he could not remember most of them. Most of his dreams revolved around what his soul desired, but he couldn't find the means to attain it. However, one dream stood out, repeating itself over time, becoming clearer and more vivid with each recurrence, as if it were etched in his subconscious. In this dream, he would meet a woman who resembled him in everything except for the turban on her head and the attributes that differentiate a man from a woman. It was as if she represented the feminine element that was an integral part of a man's existence, extracted and personified. In a way, Professor Halim had become two individuals, one complete entity, where the elements of masculinity and femininity coexisted in proportion to his wakefulness, and the other fragmented during sleep, as a male and a female, loving, communicating, and agreeing to abandon what they yearned for in waking life due to the weight of deprivation. Afterward, there was no need to reconcile what was repelled or reconsider what was embraced. The most precious thing he discovered from this dream, which had recurred extensively, was the dual awareness, the consciousness of the two elements revealed in the dream. This gratified him. He even entertained the idea that he was among those men who couldn't see what was apparent to their consciousness, thanks to this duality in his personality, understanding what others couldn't comprehend and couldn't even imagine. However, this also worried and disturbed him at times. He feared it might indicate deviant behavior or signify weakness or a symptom of illness. He often contemplated consulting a doctor, but modesty restrained him, just as greed did. He would tell himself, it's not of his doing, it happens beyond his control, and he shouldn't be blamed. In his dreams, when his willpower weakened or when the subconscious mind overpowered the conscious mind, there was no remedy or power to prevent it. Yet, he didn't see any harm in it. He remained the same in his public life, and people never found anything to criticize in him. It didn't seem apparent to them that he was experiencing this internal transformation. There was no sign that they were aware of the duality that had taken hold of him. Furthermore, Samiha exuded happiness, content with her life as a nun, devoted to her only child and not desiring anything else from her offspring. However, this didn't reassure him. How could he find peace when he didn't know and continued to wonder about his state and what might be the potential effects, based on suppositions and assumptions? These thoughts troubled him to the point of obvious weakness, given that he believed the appearance of femininity in a man, the hidden or subdued part of him during wakefulness, was unusual or uncommon, even if science couldn't provide a definite explanation. The two elements, masculinity and femininity, were inseparable, and their interaction within a man's existence determined his unique personality, whether in terms of strength, weakness, or other characteristics. They were like two waves, one dissolving into the other, becoming a single wave, and both indivisible. It was akin to two lamps with different intensities of light, yet when their lights combined, the radiance they emitted together was impossible to distinguish from its source. If the separation of these two elements was possible in what a man feels, even in his dreams, couldn't this be a sign of a crack in his existence, even if he remained firm and coherent in what he saw and felt while awake? Note, the provided text is complex and includes abstract themes. The translation may not be exact in conveying the full depth of its meaning, but it aims to capture the essence of the content. Reluctantly and against his will, Professor Halim despised what he was forced to do. He didn't resemble the contented seeker of self-discovery. Instead, he wandered aimlessly, feeling trapped and alienated, as if his soul were being devoured by boredom and disinterest. Unsurprisingly, he abandoned those distorted and flawed images that repelled him from all directions. But where could he find other images? He had no experience with anything else. He found himself incapable of creating something from nothing or being creative without generating. His experiments in solitude persisted, but they only brought about further confusion and turmoil. He bought a powerful microscope and set up his office by the roadside. There, he would lean on the window and gaze through the microscope, finding some relief in the fascination between the shutters. In front of his house, there was a tram station, and nearby, a bus station. The pavements were always full of girls and women waiting to board. He observed their features, appearances, bodies, and legs with clarity and proximity, thanks to the microscope. When night fell, he tried to visualize the images he saw during the day. As a result, whenever he was on the road or in the tram, he would look at each woman or girl as she approached and then as she moved away. However, he found it challenging to bring those imaginary images of the women into his solitude. They would mix and overlap, blurring his vision, and he couldn't hold on to a single, distinct image. It was as if he were looking into one of those funhouse mirrors that distort a person's appearance, making them all head or stomach, a grotesque transformation for amusement. Halim's main concern was not amusement, it was to find a genuine solution and alleviate the deep inner restlessness. He sought to quench the thirst that grew inside him with each passing day. Due to his modesty, his upbringing with modesty and restraint, and his inherent stinginess, he could never consider having a mistress or engaging with any of those women who willingly offer themselves to their admirers. Marriage with anyone other than Samiha was out of the question, with no room for consideration. His dreams, both awake and asleep, were initially profound when he closed his eyes. However, upon waking, he could barely remember them. Most of them revolved around desires he couldn't fulfill. Eventually, one recurring dream stood out, growing clearer with each repetition, as if it were haunting him. He began to share the dream with Samiha, where he would meet a woman who looked like him in every aspect except for certain feminine characteristics. It was as if she represented the female element that must be present in a man, extracted and embodied separately. Halim felt that this dream of duality signified a significant aspect of his personal life, which was otherwise concealed or suppressed in his waking state. He believed it reflected the intricate interaction of masculinity and femininity within him, which contributed to his unique personality, strength, weakness, or other characteristics. He entertained the idea that if it were possible to imagine a magnetic current that could separate the atoms of one element from another, it would negate the personality he had developed through the union and fusion of these elements. The mere notion of such a possibility added to his conviction that he was merely a chance amalgamation of two elements, lacking the strength of proper fusion. He felt like a crumbling building on the verge of collapse, inevitably leading to weakness, incapacity, and poverty. He could have sought medical advice to regain confidence in himself and reassurance about his well-being. However, his modesty and stinginess held him back, leading him to overthink and dwell on himself, ultimately exacerbating the issue. The dream, the thought of duality within him, weighed heavily on him, making him doubtful and uncertain, unable to determine the truth or decide between two beliefs. He confided in a friend, expressing his lukewarm state with no enthusiasm. The friend reassured him, stating that it was natural since he lived among books and not in the real world. On one occasion, he accompanied his friend to a social gathering with no cost on his part. There, he found himself more inclined towards the young girls than anyone else, as they represented the peak of youth and inexperience. He could have pursued their company further but limited their interactions to friendly conversations and light banter. However, the real affection did not extend beyond the social gatherings. Nonetheless, it intrigued him how people saw them together, but couldn't perceive the real nature of their relationship. Sometimes, they would visit a distant suburb in the late afternoon, carrying a small flask of syrup, which contained medicine for his ailment. Upon arriving, they would meet a seller of snacks named Abdul Fattah. He would fetch 2 chairs for them, along with ice and water for their drinks, as well as round bread mixed with sesame seeds and thin slices of cheese for their meal. Halim would drink his glass and savor it, occasionally joking with Samiha, who accepted his playful demeanor but didn't engage in anything beyond that. He would listen attentively, offering encouraging smiles, nodding occasionally to signify agreement or understanding. This made her open her heart, pouring out everything inside her to him. He felt responsible for providing her with advice and guidance, easing her burdens and worries, and finding solutions to her problems. She was receptive to his opinions and words, and he never overwhelmed her with his own views. However, he would occasionally direct her toward what he believed was more logical, beneficial, and worth considering. As they walked together in the secluded suburbs, they seemed to form an inseparable pair, with no indication of any relationship between them. Observers would either admire the dignity and respect between them or doubt and deny any connection, wavering between the two beliefs without reaching a conclusion. His love for simplicity and intelligence in her character, along with her good-natured and playful conversations, made it easy for her to confide in him. She would share her feelings and secrets, and he cherished this intimacy and transparency. It was a strange sight, Professor Halim, the learned and respected elder, walking arm in arm with the young girl. There was nothing to suggest any relationship between them. Some thought she was his daughter, while others doubted and hesitated, unable to decide definitively. Whenever they met old acquaintances, he never appeared flustered or awkward. Instead, he smiled and introduced her, claiming, "Our daughter is quite charming." He was content with this extent of their relationship, never seeking more despite any desires that might have lingered in his heart. Moreover, it never crossed his mind to deceive or lead her astray. He was satisfied with the pleasure derived from this level of intimacy and flirtation. He considered it enough, appreciating the trust she placed in him, and saw it as a responsibility. Restraint and deprivation, the easier of the two is to continue what he had accustomed himself to, and the more difficult is to change his ways. He feared the consequences of greed and always guarded against succumbing to it, even if he had the inclination for it. He would contemplate what he believed had befallen him, as his self-confidence wavered. Nevertheless, it was difficult for them to meet frequently, and the strong bond between them was an enduring companionship where each shared their secrets and deepest thoughts, revealing themselves fully only to each other. He found comfort in her trust and her belief in his intellect and experience. Her softness towards him and the long time they spent together allowed him to overcome his anxiety about proving himself. He felt an overwhelming desire to test himself, and the thought crossed his mind that he could deceive her and hide his weaknesses if he failed. But she was too discerning, quick to detect falsehoods, a creature that assumed everything about him was the ultimate goal. His confidence in a favorable outcome and the assurance of a positive ending pushed him to vacillate, undecided. Yet, the force driving him forward was stronger than the one holding him back. One day she told him that she hadn't menstruated in her cycle, and fear struck him. He was unsure of what to say or do, feeling helpless, and cursed his luck. Surprisingly, his fear was more for her than himself. It was strange that she, despite her anxiety, tried to reassure him and alleviate his worries. She went to a doctor she knew and was prescribed injections and medications, some for strength and others for regulation, but they proved ineffective. He remained unstable, uncertain about seeking advice and guidance. Consultation required openness and honesty, which he couldn't muster. Fate intervened when Ayad noticed his agitation, distress, and unease. He inquired about his condition, and he hesitated. How could he tell him about Abu Mahazen? Mockingly, he laughed, recognizing the irony of the situation, and God inspired him to fabricate an elaborate story, full of details except those that would implicate or incriminate him. Ayad was comforted by this story, and he directed him to a meticulous foreign doctor, offering to accompany him. But Ayad was not genuinely motivated to be his companion. He was torn between seeing this girl, learning about her, and hoping for a connection between their fates. However, Professor Halim refused to accompany him. Was there anything else he could have done? He proceeded alone to the foreign doctor first to confirm that she did not know Mahazen. When assured, he brought Mahazen to her. The foreign doctor treated her with wisdom and caution, considering all possibilities to avoid causing harm while trying to improve her condition. She prescribed injections and local remedies known for their beneficial healing properties. Professor Halim searched for the required medicines from pharmacists and herbalists, gathering what he was instructed to procure. Overcome with anxiety and paranoia, he experienced weeks of sleeplessness or fitful slumber as if drinking from an insomniac's cup. Every day, he would accompany Mahazen to the foreign doctor, waiting nearby, believing that every passerby or observer was scrutinizing him and speculating about his situation. His imagination grew, suspecting they were whispering and making gestures about him. He wondered who they thought he was and what he had done to be the subject of gossip. In his heart, he pleaded to God for an escape from this cafe. One day, the foreign doctor called him and informed him that she had exhausted all options, and the only recourse was to consult a specialist. She couldn't handle anything beyond her expertise, fearing for herself and for Mahazen. If she attempted something else, it might have adverse consequences. He pleaded with her for divine guidance, tears welling in his eyes, seeking her help to find the specialist. She shook her head with regret and empathy, saying that if she knew anyone, she wouldn't have hesitated to intervene in such a matter. Nevertheless, she directed him to a foreign female doctor. Professor Halim took Mahazen to her, overcoming his discouragement and fear of failure, explaining everything in detail. He hoped that sincerity would win her over and that she would show mercy towards Mahazen in her distress. She listened intently while he scrutinized her face, hoping to find some glimmer of hope. Finally, he said, "This is the situation." When he finished, she replied, "Listen, my dear, I am a doctor, yes, but I cannot undertake such a matter, not out of ignorance, but out of fear. However, the girl is deserving of compassion. If you wish, consult another doctor, and we will see what can be done. Return tomorrow at the same time." He left, uncertain whether to be reassured or worried. The weight of this burden pressed upon him, and he almost wished for oblivion, as it would be a kinder fate. Mahazen became calmer after that incident, more balanced and less frivolous. To those who had thought her a flirt, indifferent to men's advances, it would be a surprise to know that she had undergone the harshest trial. Her determination to end her life and the effort to maintain her cheerful facade had tested her nerves severely. And how could Mahmoud know the secret of what she deliberately revealed and concealed?